Junky. It's time to get your fix. I'm Nikki Leigh, the OG Longevity Junky.
And I'm Buck Joffrey, the health conscious hedonist.
And as this episode drops, we are in the holiday spirit. So this episode is all about the gifts of knowledge that we've received over the first 15 episodes of Longevity Junky.
So we've put together some of our favorite moments from our 2024 interviews, starting with this from the great Aubrey de Grey, one of the founding fathers of this entire longevity movement. So take a listen. So you coined this term, longevity escape velocity, some years ago, and now it's being used everywhere. They're not giving you credit, Aubrey. But I'd love for you to describe it in your own words, which is, I think your example right there is a good one, but maybe you can walk us through, for somebody who's never heard of this concept, what exactly longevity escape velocity is.
Yeah, sure. And to be honest, I do get some credit for it. But anyway, I get quite enough praise as it is. I'm perfectly happy with that. The thing about longevity escape velocity is it arises from the fact that we're talking about damage repair, rejuvenation. Because if you take someone who's, let's say, 60 years old, an average 60-year-old, they're, a few years away from starting to go downhill in terms of function as a result of the damage they accumulate. They've already got most of the damage that would be required to make them sick. So then, supposing we have developed some damage repair interventions that jointly are able to repair, let's say, half of that damage that's in the body. The reason why it wouldn't repair all the damage is because some damage is simply more difficult to repair than others. And therefore, you're going to have a progression of sophistication, a progression of efficacy of these various treatments. All right, so you can rejuvenate someone who's biologically 60 back to being, let's say, biologically 30 or 40. Now, that means that they're going to carry on aging. They're going to carry on with their metabolism generating more damage. And that damage is going to accumulate. And some of it's going to be amenable to further removal by subsequent applications of the therapies, but some of it won't, because, as I say, it's too difficult. In other words, the therapies simply don't repair those types of damage. So what's going to happen, therefore, is even if the beneficiary of all of this is getting these therapies as often as they want, they're still going to eventually get sick because of the difficult damage accumulating to a point where, on its own, even in the absence of the easy damage, there's more of it than what the body's set up to tolerate. But the thing is, that's going to take time. It's going to take 20 or 30 years. And in those 20 or 30 years, people like me, the researchers, are going to be beavering away trying to improve the therapies. In other words, trying to address the difficult damage. And 20-odd years in the future, of course, we're going to have had some success in that. We won't be able to fix all the difficult damage, but some of it will have shifted into the easy category, if you like. And therefore, when someone who's, let's say, 90 and they're biologically 60 for the second time, having had this first-generation therapy for a while, right? When they come in and they want to be re-rejuvenated, we will be able to re-rejuvenate them because we'll have Sense 2.0, right? Damage repair 2.0. And so we'll be able to give them another 30 or 50 years or whatever, and so on. So in other words, there is this concept, which I like to call longevity escape velocity, as you say, which is simply it's the minimum rate at which researchers are going to need to continue to improve the comprehensiveness of damage repair therapies in order that the residual damage that they still can't repair will not be enough to make someone sick, even though they've had a long time to accumulate it. And it's not very fast. I mean, now it is, but once we get to a threshold point of, as I say, getting maybe 20 or 30 years of postponement of the health problems of late life, then we're done. Definitely we're done. There's absolutely no way that we will fail to get the next 20 years within those 20 years and to keep going along those lines. So yeah, that I call my new foundation LEV Foundation, and here we are.
Do you see the pace of this research? We were talking about this earlier in the context of a paper that we were looking at just for fun. But I said that to me, it seems like this research in the longevity space is starting to look more like computer power, where it's more of a Moore's law type thing where it's accelerating very quickly. Do you think that that's true just because of the money and the interest coming into this space?
It's actually better than that. Yes, the money is going up exponentially. The amount of progress we have to make per year or per decade actually goes down with time. Residual, ultra-difficult damage that we still can't fix takes longer and longer to reach the point where it's bad for you. A friend of mine, Paul Hynek, a long time ago, coined the word the Methuselarity by analogy with the singularity, and basically exploring exactly the question you asked. And it's a very good word, but there are these differences. I actually wrote an entire article on the similarities and differences between the two.
How far away do you think we are from longevity escape velocity?
I said 20 years ago that I thought there was a 50% chance that we would get there within 25 years. In my defense, I did actually also say, subject to funding, I was very much expecting that funding for the early stage research that I focus on would be more forthcoming, but it wasn't. And the result was that after the first 10 years, by, let's say, 2014, not a lot had happened, to be honest. And I was still saying, between 20 and 25 years for that 50% probability of reaching LEV, reaching the Methuselarity. And so that was quite disappointing. But then the better news is that in the second period, the last 10 years, from 2014 or so until now, the timeframes have basically hardly slipped at all. That's partly because there has indeed been more money, though I have to say the money is very unevenly distributed, and we can talk more about that if you like. A lot of it is simply because progress begets progress. And, we've been able to get momentum. There's more and more people in the field. There's more and more belief that we can make progress in damage repair. And sure enough, that belief is turning into actual advances in the laboratory. So now, my 50-50 prediction is 12 to 15 years from now, so the second half of next decade.
Oh, wow. And back in 2005, correct me if I'm wrong, you were accurate in your prediction of reversing age in mice?
No. So,
no.
So when I coined the term longevity escape velocity, I was at pains to point out that, unlike most things in medicine, longevity escape velocity is going to be much easier to achieve in long-lived species like humans than it is in short-lived species like mice, simply because, you've got more time to make the next advance, right? So I don't honestly think we'll ever achieve LEV in mice. Cats and dogs, it's, marginal. Maybe we might do it.
David Sinclair says he's already done it, though, didn't he? Or you?
We'll come to that.
I'm so excited now. Well, first I want to say how sweet Aubrey de Grey is. He's so humble. And he's so positive. He's so humble, and he's doing
You thought he was
great
humble?
things.
I don't know that I would use the word humble. I think he
thought
knows
so?
he's really smart.
Well, because you were saying, people don't give you enough credit, and he's like,
Oh, yeah.
I get enough credit. Like, that's where I got the humble.
Yeah.
He's just a sweet man. But he's also super positive, and I love that. And I love how he gives people so much hope, saying, there's so many things to do now to repair damage and that we're working on, and then just kind of keep doing those things. And then in 12 to 15 years, we have such great dedicated scientists and researchers, and we will have, the answers or protocols to which we can apply then that will attack the more intense damage that we're not able to address now. So I thought that was very, eye-opening and very and positive and just reassuring for the future.
Yeah, I mean, listen, he's in many ways he's a futurist, right? And he definitely was probably my favorite interview as well, and mostly just because I approached this space with this sort of bigger vision than what is now. So much of what we talk about is probably more important on a day-to-day basis, which is things about diet and exercise and sleep and all those things that are going to make a difference and keep us alive and well until something bigger is discovered. For example, in the case of Aubrey talking about this longevity escape velocity, if the idea, in the big picture, the way I view this whole concept is that I want to, beyond the obvious, I want to be healthy now because I feel better when I'm healthy, right? But having a bigger goal to say that, if I can stay healthy and if I can, do the things I need to do right now, there is something at the end of the rainbow, this pot of gold that might be just 12 to 15 years from now.
Yeah.
Which if I can make it to that point without damaging myself a lot, I could be part of this entire new paradigm of human existence, which is, to constantly be able to reverse aging and, live a much longer and presumably meaningful life during those years than historically ever was possible before. And so I think that, to me, I'm I'm an optimist when it comes to this, and I love hearing that from him. And I should point out that, Aubrey's gone from being a little bit of a pariah in this space where, he's obviously a smart guy, but I think a lot of people 20 years ago, when they heard him talking about longevity, escape velocity, and the idea of age reversal, they kind of thought of this as, this isn't science. This is a guy who's just looking to get some attention, and that has obviously, there's still people who say that,
sure,
but he's become
it's changed so much. It's so mainstream now.
Exactly, and I think a lot more scientists are open to the idea, which they never were. They were not previously. So yeah, super interesting guest.
Okay, so another really special episode for me personally was when we went to visit my dear friend, Dr. Daniel Amen, who is a brilliant celebrity therapist who uses brain imaging and brain mapping to identify mental illnesses. So here, take a look.
I had this great case early on, like the first year I started imaging. I'm also a child psychiatrist. I was seeing these two kids, and I realized they're not getting better because their parents hate each other. And so I started seeing the parents in marital therapy. Well, and I started to hate the parents because nothing I did worked, and I hate that, right? I hate being ineffective. And at 9 months of seeing these people, I'm completely ineffective. I'm in the shower getting ready to go to work, and I realize they're on my schedule, and my stomach starts to hurt. And I'm like, today I'm going to tell them to get divorced because it's not good for them or me. But I grew up Roman Catholic, and my mother was so serious about the whole thing. And, getting divorced.
I don't want to go to hell.
Very bad thing. And so the voice, right? Only Catholics understand. There's a Catholic voice in your head. It's planted there like a chip. It's like, you're going to tell these people to get divorced because you're not a good enough therapist, and damn their eternal souls to hell. And I just started looking at the water faucet, like, how much more therapy do I need? And I got out of the shower and called the person who owned the imaging center. And I said, would you give me 2 scans for the price of 1? She had an obsessive brain. So her frontal lobes worked way too hard. That's what we see in OCD. And he had ADD. He had low activity in his frontal lobes. So he was constantly conflict seeking, drama driven, always sort of irritating her and late. And she had a PhD in grudge holding. And the night before, so if you believe in random chance, the night before I read an article in the American Journal of Psychiatry, that Prozac calms down the anterior cingulate in this sort of hyperfrontal pattern. And I knew how to treat his ADD, so I put him on Ritalin, her on Prozac. I said, look, I don't want to see you guys for a month. I want to just let's let the medicine work. And they came back, and they were so good. Like, he had settled down. She wasn't so rigid. It's like, how do you do marital therapy if you actually don't know the biology of the people who are suffering?
You were talking about like environments and things like that can impact the health of the brain. Are there environmental factors that we are overlooking that can impact the health of our brain and what we should look out for or protect against or things like that?
So I think brain health is 3 things. Brain envy, got to care about it, right? It's the largest sex organ in the body. Think of it that way. Brain envy, avoid things that hurt it, do things that help it. And I developed an acronym a long time ago called Bright Minds. You want to keep your brain healthy. or rescue it. You have to prevent or treat the 11 major risk factors that steal your mind. And that's what leads us to what are the bad habits, what are the good habits. So bright minds, B is for blood flow. Anything that decreases blood flow is bad for your brain. When you realize your brain's involved in everything you do, how you think, how you feel, how you act, how you get along with other people, it's the organ of intelligence, character, and every decision you make. Well, oh my God, why would you ever hurt it unless you were stupid? Yeah. Right? I mean, it's like when you get this information, it changes things if you attach to the information. And so nicotine constricts blood flow to the brain. And now we have this vaping epidemic. Marijuana decreases blood flow to the brain. I published a study on 1,000 marijuana users. Every area of their brain was lower in blood flow. If you're sedentary, if you have high blood pressure, if you have erectile dysfunction, because if you have blood flow problems anywhere, it means they're everywhere. And so that's B. R is retirement and aging. The older we get, the more serious we need to be. And are you having strategies that accelerate aging, like high iron levels? So many people don't even think about that. But if you have high iron levels, your brain's prematurely aging. If you have low iron levels, you're anxious and look like you have ADD and you don't sleep well and you have restless leg syndrome. The I is inflammation, major cause of mental health problems. And inflammation comes from infections, from fast food, from sugar, from having low omega-3 fatty acids in your body, and not taking care of your teeth. People who have gum disease is a major cause of heart disease, but also dementia. The G is genetics, and we don't think about genetics right. Genes load the gun, but it's our behavior that pulls the trigger. And so I want you to know your risk factors. Like I have heart disease and obesity in my family, but I don't have heart disease and I'm not overweight because every day of my life, I'm on an obesity heart disease prevention program. I adopted my 2 nieces. I think I told you that. And because both their parents were drug addicts. And I'm like, you need to be on an addiction prevention program every day of your life. And when I caught the older one vaping, I grounded her for 6 months. I'm like, no.
Yeah.
I'm only doing this if you and I are aligned. And that's your risk, and you need to know it. The H is head trauma, major cause of psychiatric problems. And very few people know about it because psychiatrists don't look at the brain, so they don't know your intermittent explosive disorder is a result of the concussion.
So that's probably something a lot of parents are thinking about. We're nearing football season. What's your thoughts on that in terms of prevention of traumatic brain injury and kind of your experience with professional athletes? I know.
Yeah, golf is good. Tennis is terrific. Table tennis is the world's best sport.
Yeah, pickleball has taken over the world.
Pickleball is awesome. When I was at the Olympics, I went to the table tennis match, and it was amazing, their reflexes and how fun that is. No. If you love your children. Now, if you don't like them.
If you don't love your children.
If you don't love your children.
Let them go for Pop Warner football.
But why would you put them in a sport? And I loved football, right? I played football. I've been a crazy Los Angeles Ram fan my whole life since I was a little kid. Until I started scanning NFL brains, and almost all of them are terrible.
Yeah.
Right? Your brain is soft, right? You know this more than me. But like the consistency of soft butter, your skull is really hard and has sharp, bony ridges. Helmets don't protect you from brain damage. They protect you from skull fractures.
I know what he's talking about, but it's hard. You know, I'm a Minnesota Vikings fan, and I live, breathe, and sleep, that fan lifestyle in so many ways. So hearing him talk about that, I was like, yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah, I know. But
Yeah. So yeah. So it's like one of those things, right? Like,
yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Would you, if you had a son, would you
Would I
let
keep him
him
from
play
football,
football?
basically?
Yeah. If he said, Mom, I love football. It's like my favorite sport in the world, and all my friends are playing. What would you do?
I know. On it, well, fudge, man. I mean, I think I would let him play. I mean, I
Yes.
can't, because I understand the love of football. I understand the love of sports. I understand, okay, we've had so many episodes that have told us our surroundings, our social life, our friends, our family, the love, like all of that is very, very important. So if he comes to me and says, Mom, all my friends are doing it, I like football, I want to do it, then, I honestly would let him.
Yeah.
I would also probably just be very protective or talk to, I feel like by now or by then there would be, I don't know, better helmets or something. I don't know. But
Yeah.
I would definitely make sure that everything else in his life was very protective of his brain. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no,
Let's take
I think that's
extra
right.
precaution. But I
And
can't not let him play football.
yeah, I know.
You know?
I mean, it's sort of, it's funny that we're just kind of taking this, on all the things and talking about football, but that's what I was thinking about. And, I don't actually, I don't have any boys. I have 3 daughters, and,
yeah, so you don't even have to think about that. And I know I'm going to have a son. I know it in my bones.
My youngest one might play flag football, though. I'm so excited. She's
fun.
9 and she's really fast. So I couldn't be more excited to see that in action.
I've heard that flag football is a little more intense than regular football.
Probably don't get the head injuries though, right? Because there's not.
You don't even wear a helmet, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But anyway, I think for me the big takeaway on this one too, and I think resonated with me very much is, his Dr. Raymond talks about essentially psychiatry, and probably more broadly, psychiatric treatment. So much of it is not really trying to look at what the anatomy behind the problem is, and it's literally the only part of medicine that we don't do that, right? Like, so if we have a problem with our lungs, we're going to look and take an MRI of the lungs, or we're going to do some other kind of visualization or activity. We're going to see what kind of pulmonary functions we have, things like that. We don't really do that with the brain, and it
so crazy.
Doesn't make sense.
It doesn't,
because and we've had conversations with others, even when it comes to the physiology of the brain changing just from like diet and things like that. So it's an organ just like every other organ,
right.
And the way we have traditionally dealt with psychiatric illness or mental illness has been sort of hand wavy rather than concrete in the way we deal with other diseases. And I think I like that approach, and it also makes it also makes these kinds of diseases more real, because I think people a lot of times
having
maybe
an
not
image
as
of
much.
It, you mean?
Yeah,
because
maybe not these days.
Seeing is believing.
And these days, it's not as big a deal, but 20, 30 years ago, no one would admit to depression. It's like a weakness, right? And now I think they're more accepted. It's accepted as a real thing. But as I've said it before, I think people need to stop thinking of mental illness as weakness and more as real disease.
Yes.
Like, you wouldn't tell a diabetic, don't take your medication because that's weak. I mean, you get a problem with your pancreas, or you have insulin sensitivity. You got to do something about it. In the same way, you shouldn't tell somebody who's got mental illness to just suck it up and be tough.
Yeah. And I feel like more and more, like the more I learn about feelings and the more I learn about how things really impact somebody, it's almost, for me now, I find more strength in confronting the feeling, because the feeling is what we push down, right? It's like that feeling of, discomfort is what we just try and bury away. But at least in my life, I've seen that I feel stronger and more courageous being able to face head on whatever that feeling is.
Yeah. And ultimately, I don't know if it's depressing to look at it this way or not, but again, because so my past is a neurosurgery guy, operating on the brain, it's all the things that we feel, all of our, whether that's good, bad, anger, sadness, whatever, these are all electrical impulses. And so in that regard, they're all physiology.
Yeah.
And you don't really need to look further than the fact that you can, if you're in a really, really bad mood, just take a look inside and try to understand what those feelings are and everything like that. And then 30 minutes later, when you don't feel like that anymore and those same thoughts don't come through, it's because those chemicals and those electrical impulses aren't firing anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, trying to treat the brain and all of its activity as real physiology, the way, any kind of organ works, right? Like your lungs are working properly, they're not working properly.
Mm-hmm.
You have some problems, maybe you're an asthmatic. The brain's the same way. So anyway, a very interesting perspective on how to look at the brain.
Yeah, I love that. We're going to take a quick break. All right. Welcome back to Longevity Junky.
And another clip that we should look at is one of my friends who we had on the show, Robert Lufkin, Dr. Robert Lufkin. So nice. He wrote this book called Lies I Taught in Medical School.
That's
and
a
he
great
joined
book.
us, and it's a New York Times best-selling book. And we talked a little bit about his perspective on health and longevity.
I am a new fan of yours because Buck turned me on to you and your book, and I am in the middle of reading it right now. It's so eye-opening, but it's also me going, exactly what I've been trying to tell people, and I didn't know how to word it, And so I want to ask you, what inspired you to write Lies I Taught in Medical School, and how did your own journey shape the book's perspective on modern medicine?
Yeah, great question. I mean, my background is, as you said, I'm actually part of the problem. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm really a conventional medicine doctor. I've been a medical school professor my whole career. I get to teach and learn from doctors in training. I get to practice medicine, and I get to do research too. So this is where I'm coming from. And the book is very critical of Western medicine, which I'm a part of. So I have to say, first of all, I love Western medicine. I think it has revolutionized the lives of those of us who lived in the 20th century. And even today, if I have an acute injury, an automobile accident, I'm going to want that blood transfusion. I'm going to want Buck to work on my, whatever, and get things taken care of, acutely, the splenectomy, whatever. But the problem is, and what the book really addresses, is that in the 21st century, we're now facing a tidal wave of chronic diseases that, while they were present in the 20th century, they now take up almost 80% of healthcare resources in numbers that have never before seen historically, even correcting for population differences. And when Western medicine applies the same pills and surgeries that were so effective in the 20th century against the diseases of that time, they don't really work. They mask the symptoms, but they don't get to the root cause. And what really forced me to look at this myself was, I'd like to say, hey, I want to make the world a better place. But no, I was actually busy doing my job as a medical school professor, doing research, taking money from drug companies and device makers and the federal government, when suddenly I came down with 4 of these chronic diseases myself. And I was prescribed prescription medicines for each one of those. And, I asked them, hey, what about lifestyle? I keep hearing about that. And they said, well, it really doesn't work. You're going to take these drugs for the rest of your life. So get used to it, and knowing what I knew about the chronic diseases, I knew it wasn't going to end well, and I still had kids in elementary school at the time. So out of self-interest, really, I began to look deeper into, was there any other possibility? And I realized there's been a revolution in our understanding of the causes of these diseases that I wasn't aware of, and many of my colleagues, sadly, are still not aware of. And that's really what got me on this journey and implementing them in myself. And I was able to reverse those chronic diseases, get off all medicines. The doctors thought the labs were broken. But anyway, now I've made it my mission to communicate this message to other people in this book and other ways so that they don't make the same mistakes that I did.
Yeah.
What you're getting at is something that I think is critically important to longevity medicine and to really just to health span in general, which is you're talking about metabolic dysfunction. And this concept that really, again, just in the 2000s or whatever, when I was in school, we didn't really talk about this. And I think it was a relatively new thing. There was some talk about this Syndrome X and how that it might sort of potentially be sort of the root cause of a number of diseases, such as diabetes, heart disease, Alzheimer's, even cancer. Can you talk about how that evolved and ultimately what that is? Because people talk about metabolic health all the time, but this really is the piece you've got to get.
Yeah, great question. Let me sort of bring that to focus. These chronic diseases that I'm mentioning, the 4 I had and several other ones that we're talking about, just to name it, we're actually talking about everything from obesity to diabetes to hypertension to cardiovascular disease to cancer to Alzheimer's disease and even mental illness. And it's believed today still by many, if not most doctors, that these are very separate diseases and they each need a separate pill or separate treatment. And this understanding of metabolic health is still needs to, people still need to be aware of it. And the real breakthrough for me was that all these diseases are treated by the pills, which reverse the symptoms, which really in most cases don't control the long-term progression of the disease. So the disease keeps getting worse, even though you may not have the symptoms. So what can you do to reverse these? Well, it's lifestyle approaches. It's relatively straightforward changes in diet, nutrition, exercise, and several things like that will actually slow these diseases down and reverse them better than the pills and surgery in many cases. And people are not aware of that. So this is a conversation about longevity. Why are we even talking about these chronic diseases? Well, just to be clear, for you, me, and most of your audience out there, we will statistically die of one of the diseases I just mentioned. If you go down the list, those are the big killers, and they will determine how long we live because that will be our lifespan. So once we start pushing those diseases back and delaying their onset, we're actually improving longevity. And it's a big deal because it really makes a difference.
Lifestyle really, really matters. That, we have big pharma shoving down our throat. And as he said, the doctor was like, okay, we'll get used to it. You're going to have to take these pills forever. And, and I think that is just, that just blew my mind that he now has this stance and he's he's part of the people who teach the next generations of doctors and things like that. So it makes me feel really good to know that he's in there.
I really respect Robert a lot. And, I think one of the things to understand though, in general, is that these, there is sort of a tendency to vilify doctors in this. The thing is that, we learned a certain way. We learned certain things. And, what he's talking about specifically are, we learn to recognize when somebody has high blood pressure and how to treat high blood pressure. We recognize when somebody has high cholesterol to treat high cholesterol. And each one of them does have a mechanism, right? Each of them has a way it develops. But I think what we didn't understand, And even when I went to medical school, and so we're talking about, I'm not that old, right? So even when I was in medical school, say, 20, I don't know, what was it, 20 years ago? Who knows? Anyway, when I was in medical school, we didn't have this understanding that there was this thing that these diseases were kind of downstream of one major metabolic problem, which is what we called metabolic syndrome. And his book really is about, it's about metabolic syndrome. That's what this book is about. He describes it in many, in ways that I think people understand it well. But at the end of the day, let me just remind you, if it's okay, what metabolic syndrome is, the sequence of events that happen. Basically, you're starting out with excessive, and again, this is generalization, but excessive energy intake, specifically, say you're taking in a bunch of carbohydrate, simple carbs, sugar, right? And that ends up leading to this response of insulin overproduction. We've talked about how insulin generally removes blood sugar from the blood into the muscles and that kind of thing. But so you get this huge spike in insulin that is responding to these loads of sugar that we're getting in our diets these days. Insulin generally results in fat storage and accumulation. And that includes not only in our bellies and all that stuff, but in our liver. That's where we get fatty liver, which is an increasing problem. And that increase in fat, like, for example, visceral fat in the belly, we talked about sort of that pot belly or beer belly or whatever you want to talk about, releases various kinds of chemicals called cytokines, which lead to chronic inflammation. And that inflammation can result in furthering of, higher risk of cancer. It can result in higher risk of cardiovascular disease. It basically amplifies everything, right? And then the thing turns into a big feedback loop. Ultimately, that makes you more and more insulin resistant. And this whole slew of things that I just described becomes worse and worse and worse. And the way Dr. Lufkin talks about ultimately reversing that is dealing with the core issue, which was really dealing with diet. Right? So anyway, I just wanted, I hope that wasn't too much, but I just think that the metabolic dysfunction issue is so core to longevity. It's really important that people understand that.
Yeah, I think it's really important that in your diet, you kind of just got to go back to the basics. Like before all these, big manufacturers were able to push out, donuts, Doritos, candies, like in mass production. Like I feel like having, like an agricultural spirit in your life of making sure you have whole foods and things that are naturally grow within the earth and things like that. I think that's really what our body was designed to digest and to live with. And we're supposed to be able to live off the earth, right? So we're supposed to be able to take in these foods and herbs and things like that. And that should be our medicine. Like our body can regenerates itself, builds itself. Like we have all the tools within us, but if we're taking in foreign things and things that we're chemically making, it's not, our body isn't designed to coexist with that in a way that it's going to be really healthy and have longevity. So yeah, I love that he's actually had to pull from life experiences of being very, very sick and thinking that he's doing everything right, being in the field and being somebody that people look up to for information. And I really respect him for also having an open mind, because personally, from some doctors that I know, you excluded, of course, but from some doctors that I know that, learn all these things in medical school. And then I have come in conversation with them and told them things that Robert is saying. And they're telling me, no, that's not the way. Or, this isn't what and trust me, I'm a doctor and I hate that term.
Well, you know what? One of the solutions to that though, and I think this is an important thing is you have to find a doctor that you feel comfortable with, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you have to find somebody who's going to listen to you, and who is a little bit on your page. I think there's more and more doctors out there who are willing to go back and forth with patients than there used to be. But on the other hand, it's a challenge too, because like, listen, the way that doctors and doctors' offices are set up right now with insurance is that, you're allowed like 10, 15 minutes max per patient, and they just don't have the time to go back and forth. And that's not, I mean, listen, it is what it is, right? These guys are just trying to get by and survive and see all the patients they need to see or they're supposed to see, that insurance ultimately will allow them to exist seeing, right? Like if you have to see like 40 patients a day just to keep your practice in business, it makes it kind of hard to do this. But I do think that there is a little bit of a responsibility of physicians on an ongoing basis to keep an open mind, and a lot of us don't. That's just the truth.
We're going to take a quick break, and we will be back with your healthy takeout. Welcome back to Longevity Junky. Okay, one huge eye-opener for me this year was our special on long COVID. We spoke to David Petrino, who has been on the front line treating patients suffering from long COVID since the start of the pandemic. Take a listen.
One quick question. It's not a quick question for you, but when you see people here who've got these sort of long COVID symptoms for a year, more than a year, they actually ever see them get better?
Right back to the beginning, it depends on what's driving their symptoms. So we've seen people who, on average, the people who come to us at this point, by the time they find us, by the time they get an appointment, by the time they get seen by us, on average, our data says that they've been living with long COVID for 2 years. That's kind of the average number. Our data at this point, our outcomes data at this point, drives us toward the idea that 20% of the people who come through our clinic will, at the 100-day mark, so after about 3 months of working with us, they will report complete remission. Thanks very much. I'm great. This has turned me around. I'm good. Now, I always say we'll report because, they could be one more immune challenge away from coming back and saying, I feel terrible. We don't know. That we don't have those follow-up data, but they could be a reinfection away from coming back and saying, I'm back at square one. I do remember one anecdote of one such person who was incredible. She then fell pregnant and triggered her immune system, and we had to work with her again, and she recovered quite well the second time around as well. But that, her immune system changing as through the pregnancy process led her to have these, a reactivation of long COVID symptoms. So, but at the very least, at the 3 month mark, a lot of people sort of leave and say, I'm feeling great. Thank you very much. By far the biggest chunk, sort of 65, 70% of the people who come to the clinic, we can double their activity levels. We can halve the number of symptoms they're experiencing. And those numbers are the data at the 100-day mark. So they're doing twice as much as they used to do. They're experiencing half as many symptoms as they were in terms of just the raw number of symptoms. And in general, they're just able to do a little bit more, and it's a process, but, they're not feeling as though they are the person they were before they got infected. They're just doing much better than they were when they came in the door.
So in this episode, I just remember going into it not knowing at all what the hell long COVID was. I had no idea. So I feel like this was one of the episodes that just humbled me and also just made me feel like, wow, this is really happening in the world. And I really had no idea. And in such drastic measures, it was really intense.
I think this one was interesting too. I think it's always tricky talking about COVID because the nature of everything that happened got so embroiled with politics and lockdowns and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, there's this disease called that we're calling long COVID that is affecting what I think it was 7% of the population. It's insane.
It's a totally different disease.
It's a totally different disease, and a lot of people are dealing with it. And frankly, I didn't, even though I think I kind of suffered from it for a brief period of time, just a couple months after having COVID myself, the OG COVID, by the way, pre-vaccination, before there was anything like that. I didn't know really how this worked, and you just kept hearing about these random symptoms of brain fog, and you hear about, weakness and some problems with the autonomic nervous system and things like that. But this was the first time I kind of heard a uniform theory of why this happens. So I was fascinated. It was almost like learning about a new disease for the very first time for me. And that doesn't happen very often.
I know. Cool. I felt like we were both like real new students to this. And the thing I was very shocked about was the muscle fatigue.
Yeah.
How you would think that maybe you're like sore from like a workout or something, but it was even more extreme than that. And you would, I think he mentioned at one point, like even just like carrying groceries or just something like very, everyday life was fatiguing you. And that to me was very shocking.
Yeah. And one thing that I remember from the show, as it relates to what you just said, is that the way to think about long COVID is accelerated aging, right? So the reason for a lot of this problems with lifting groceries and all that stuff are what happens to the mitochondria as we age. Well, mitochondria become weaker. Those are the powerhouses of the cell, and they become compromised in patients with long COVID. So it's very interesting to me with like sort of. So to me, what the takeaway here was, what is long COVID? Well, it's accelerated aging, which includes low grade inflammation, which is sort of classic in pretty much all disease processes, chronic disease processes, and then essentially compromised mitochondrial function. And so to put those into perspective, again, that is what happens to people when they age. And so how are we treating that? How are they treating that? Well, they're treating the inflammation. They're treating the mitochondria, right? Claritin, right? We were talking about Claritin in this.
Yeah.
Like something, like an allergy medication, it's got a histamine blocker. And then various supplements that help mitochondria
NAD plus
regenerate.
And CQ10.
Yeah, and all those things that we talk about in longevity, right, are really what are being used to treat long COVID. So
literally after that episode, I literally went out to Costco and I bought the CQ10.
The CoQ10,
the liquid, the CoQ10. Like I was like, oh my gosh, okay, I was like, I remember I have to have this one for sure. Well, I feel like we already went into this takeaway part that we usually do at the end of the show with what you were just saying, Buck. But to finish out, I wanted to also say that I feel like my big takeaway from Longevity Junky interviews of 2024 is something we haven't shown yet. And that was with the interview of Dr. Lungo about intermittent fasting and him saying that there's more research now saying that intermittent fasting is, although fine and good for the short term, the long term, it is actually not good for our health. And that fasting for more than 12 hours reduces our lifespan and our longevity. So that to me still sticks in my head. And I don't know, it trips me out, to be honest with you, because you feel so good.
Yeah. So this is the challenge. So specifically what Walter Longo was talking about is, okay, we know that in the short term, intermittent fasting was shorter windows. Specifically, that's what he was raising the alarm about. He's an advocate for intermittent fasting if it's like, 11 or 12-hour windows,
12
right?
hours, he was saying, yeah.
But if you're getting to these less than 8-hour windows, which is what, a lot of people in longevity space are doing. I was doing this for 2 or 3 years. That's what he's talking about. So what we know about, what he is saying is that from a short-term standpoint, if you're talking about the next 6 months or something, it's a good intervention. So if you are obese or if you've got diabetes and you're trying to get control of things, doing something like this for 6 months to try to get control works. But ultimately, what he's saying is that if you continue to do this for decades and decades, the overall implication for your body may be not what you want, which is high blood pressure, higher levels of cardiovascular disease. So again, it's one of those things, like it's like everything else. I mean, we, offline we were talking about plastics, right? Microplastics, which we'll talk about on the show at some point. But it's the same kind of frustration I have where I remember like 3 years ago, I was still drinking tap water and somebody was making fun of me for drinking tap water. And so I was like, why? What's the big deal? And I got convinced to drink bottled water. Well, now we learned that there's a bunch of microplastics in the bottled water. I might have been better off just drinking tap water to begin with.
I don't know.
But but that's the point, right?
Yeah.
It's like constantly moving goalposts. So, all you can do is take the information out there, try to process it and make the best decision possible.
True. And also one thing that was popping in my head from the episode as we were talking about this, because it is kind of confusing, like we're saying, we like intermittent fasting. There's so much data out there saying that intermittent fasting is like the way to go and it's super healthy for you. And now we have like this research that we didn't have before because intermittent fasting wasn't really a thing. But now we have research saying that longevity, like there is no real longevity with intermittent fasting. It's just better for short term. Now, I do remember from the episode that he said if you take like a couple of days, like 2-3 days or whatever, like if you're really in a bind with your health or there's something really going on, it's good they want you to reach this autophagy, which is the cleaning out of like, like unhealthy, bad, dead cells. And that he recommends kind of doing like a 3, a 3.
Well, he has the fasting mimetic diet.
Like he has the fast mimicking diet. And those are for people who really cannot like do that, right? Like really literally cannot cut out food like legitimately. Well, and so they need something to help their body to still get that, that autophagy, but also be able to eat something. Now, personally, I've done a 10-day fast, felt amazing. My nails grew so long. My hair grew. It was incredible. My skin was amazing. It was really like it blew my mind what 10 days of not eating anything, just having I just did the it's the lemon water with cayenne pepper and maple grade B maple syrup or something, and that's all I drank, all I consumed for 10 days. And I think doing little things like that, maybe once a year or something, is really, really good for you. And that kind of, it does way more in a shorter period of time than doing, 365 days of intermittent fasting. But
and just to be clear, there's two different things here. When we talk about intermittent fasting, Walter would say that's just the daily regimen, right? Having some sort of, 12 or 11, 12 hour window, whatever. The other kind of fasting is totally different.
Sure.
Long-term fasting or fasting mimetic diet. It has different purposes. Whereas like, I think people who do the 8-hour window fasting, I used to think this too. I thought you were getting autophagy and stuff like that from those daily fasts, but you're not. What he's saying is that the fasting mimetic diet or fasts that are greater than, say, 48, 72 hours, what they do is different. Fundamentally, that's where you get autophagy, which is essentially the body's way of clearing out old cells that are zombie cells that we call senescent cells, and also promoting the growth of new stem cells, and essentially sort of doing a cleaning house of old cells and creating new ones. That only occurs with long-term fasting, or what he calls the fasting mimetic diet, which he basically created, which is a 5-day fast with sort of minimal calories. It fools the body into thinking it's not eating anything, and obviously he's even shown that it's beneficial in cancer patients as well.
Yeah, that was a big takeaway too. All right, I want to read this out. Longevity Junky is created by Dr. Buck Joffrey, MD, and Timothy Fonara. It is executive produced by myself, Nikki Leigh, Buck Joffrey, and Timothy Fonara. The show is produced by Pretty Fast, and Phil Ferragamo is our producer, and original music by Alloy Tracks. We're distributed by our friends at Acast, and see you next time.